Here's a rundown of the key points from Quiz 9. So, the second triumvirate versus the first triumvirate. These two entities are very different things. Yes, they're both three powerful men, but the first triumvirate is a behind-the-scenes private deal where the three most powerful men in Rome decide to get together and manipulate the system from the shadows. This is Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar getting together to control the Roman government just by virtue of them having gained their own independent power through their control of military and political and economic resources and their popularity with their own factions. So the first triumvirate, is an illegal, shadow deal-making thing. The second triumvirate is the actual government of Rome. After the death of Julius Caesar, the state is unable to function. He had been dictator for 5 years, and before that had been a series of destructive civil wars. The government is not in shape to actually stand up and take care of Rome and the vast Roman Empire. The Julius Caesar has demonstrated they need a strong man that the people and the military believe in order to hold things up. And so, as there isn't a obvious candidate to succeed Caesar, nobody particularly wants one particular strong man to be another Caesar, to have all that power go to his head again. This is invested in three men, the three most powerful men in Rome, who are given the formal responsibility in 5-year increments to uphold the government of the city of Rome and of the provinces. And so this is Octavian and Antony and Lepidus. Antony and Octavian, the direct successors of Caesar in different ways. Octavian, the heir of Caesar, Antony, Caesar's lieutenant, and Lepidus, who had been acting with Caesar, but who was also the Pontifex Maximus. And so what they have in common is that in both cases, these are the three most powerful men, three men who are stronger than the government itself. In the first instance, in the first triumvirate, they decide privately to manipulate things from the shadows. By the time of Caesar's assassination, they are able to step in and take over the formal official government of the city of Rome. What actions do Sulla and Caesar have in common in seizing power? Both Sulla and Caesar march on Rome and take it by military force and make themselves dictator. And use the dictatorship to reform the city of Rome according to their own political agenda. And using this situation to act in a ruthless way, but toward a vision of Rome that they see as being to the betterment of Rome itself and its communities. So both of these are ambitious and ruthless men, but both of them are acting on behalf of what they see as a greater future for Rome. They are dramatically different, though, in terms of what it is that they want to accomplish. Sulla is a champion of the Amtamates and believes in the old ways, believes in tradition, believes in the old institutions of the Republic and in the power of the Senate to enforce and preserve those old institutions and the mos maiorum. The ways of our ancestors. And so Sulla's reforms are about restoring the power of the Senate, reducing the power of the populace, emasculating the tribunes of the plebs, and bringing things back to the way that they were before the Gracchi. Before the revolution had started to cascade. He is the anti-Marius. He stands for Rome's traditions and for the role of the Senate, the strength of the Senate, the power of the Senate in preserving those traditions. Julius Caesar is the heir of Marius, and is the champion of the populists, and believes in a Rome that is protected and preserved not by institutions that puts the same rich and incapable people in power that had put Rome in such a disastrous situation again and again. Not in the institutions, not in the Senate, which is venal and saturated, immersed in its own craven desire for power and wealth. Not in the nobility. Julius Caesar believes in a Rome that is protected and preserved by individuals who can demonstrate their capability, their individuals who have the experience and the strength of character to be worthy of that trust. And so he is the champion of the populists, and his reforms are in the interest of breaking down the power of the Senate, and in replacing all the old mechanisms and institutions that kept all of these craven, power and wealth obsessed incompetence in power, and replacing that with a Rome that is held together by an individual person that everyone can believe in, that people have faith and trust in. And so, both of them are dictators. Both of them are involved in taking Rome by force. Both of them are involved in a march on Rome. But in terms of what it is that they do that for, why they do that, both of them are doing that for a greater Rome. But their vision of Rome, their visions of Rome are diametrically opposed to each other. What are some of the factors that gave Octavian an advantage over Antony? There's a lot to talk about here, but the basic idea is that Antony goes off to the east and sets himself up in Alexandria and talks about the east as being, the future of the Roman Empire. This is where, the depth of culture and wealth and commerce and industry are in the east, and he talks about making, Alexandria a new capital of the Roman Empire. This is very easy for Octavian to present as turning his back on everything that Romans believe in, and associating himself, miring himself in Eastern decadence. And exactly the kind of thing that the Romans turned their back on when they first formed their identity, throwing away, rejecting the ideas of opulence and displays of Eastern ideas that came to them through the Greeks and the Etruscans and the Phoenicians and so forth. All of that is un-Roman, not part of the intrinsic Roman identity. And Octavian appeals to that. He calls upon the mos maiorum. He calls upon what it is to be fundamentally Roman, which is to be self-sacrificing, which is to be about the family instead of the individual, and so forth and so on. And so he presents Antony as as turning his back on Rome. That's the first part. The second part is Antony demonstrates that Octavian is right in the propaganda that he's putting out by rejecting his Roman wife and marrying the queen of Egypt, Cleopatra. Antony's Roman wife is Octavia. Octavia is Octavian's sister and is well known within Rome as being the most virtuous of matrons. And so Octavian is able to take this and play this up, like Lucretia, back at the beginning of the Roman story, targeted by Sextus Tarquin because she is the most virtuous of matrons 500 years before. Here is Antony doing exactly the same thing, despoiling and despising his own wife, the most virtuous of Roman matrons, in order to marry a decadent Eastern Roman despot, and to literally and figuratively ally himself with everything that is un-Roman, that is Eastern, to set aside his own wife, to set aside his own children, to reject, literally and figuratively, Roman virtue. This is how Octavian presents it, and so Octavia becomes this symbol of everything that Rome is, and that Antony is turned against. Third aspect here is that Octavian is the heir of Caesar, and because he was adopted by Caesar in his will, he has Caesar's name. So Octavian is known to the Romans as his formal name is Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, and he is known as young Caesar. And so having the Caesar name it puts him in the position of being the successor to that massive faith and trust, the hero worship in their champion that the people of Rome and the legions had, and that caused them so much fury when Caesar was assassinated by the horrible nobility. And so Julius Caesar is able to position himself as the new Caesar because his name gives him an in with the people in the legions, and he is in a position to demonstrate that he can fulfill that promise by championing the people, by championing the legions, and this is what Octavian does. And so these three things together make Octavian, even though he is just a kid, even though he has no political experience, it puts him in a situation of huge advantage. And this means that he has loyalty and resources of military leadership, even though military leadership that had served under Caesar, even though Antony was Caesar's lieutenant. Because the fourth aspect of this is Antony is not a well-liked person. His character is brusque and coarse, and he doesn't have the charisma, the ability to bond and connect with a smile and a speech the way Caesar had. Octavian has that ability to bond and connect. He's able to win people over. Antony turns people against him. And the people of Rome had experience of this. Much of Caesar's dictatorship, the 5 years he was dictator, Caesar was away fighting various wars throughout the Mediterranean, and Antony was in Rome as Caesar's agent, and he was doing Caesar's dirty work, and he did it in a very brusque and coarse way. And so people had firsthand experience of just how mean and nasty Antony is. So those four things together mean that when push comes to shove, Antony's allies are Easterners, and Octavian has the best of Caesar's military leadership, most notably Marcus Agrippa. Octavian, being a kid, isn't a great military leader, but he is able to make use of Marcus Agrippa, one of the great generals of his time, to bring about a decisive victory at Antium, and this means that Octavian is already winning when Cleopatra abandons the naval battle and sails away, and Antony sails after him. This is why Cleopatra sails away. Antony doesn't lose simply because Cleopatra sails away. Cleopatra sails away because Antony is losing. And that's because he has Marcus Agrippa, because Octavian is able to bring about the loyalty and faith and trust of the legions and the military leadership, as well as the masses of the Roman people. And Antony's loss at Antium means that Octavian is the last warlord standing and is in a position to be the focal point of all of the faith and trust of the Roman people, and to become, a few years later, the first princeps. Caesar formally became an enemy of the Roman state. A lot of people get this question wrong. This is not asking why was Caesar killed. This is not asking, what it was that put things over the edge. This is asking, when does he become a formal enemy of the Roman state? When does the Roman state declare that Caesar is an enemy? and that is when he crosses the Rubicon and violates Roman law by bringing his army with him, as Caesar was a commander in charge of Gaul and its legions there. It's illegal for a general to bring his legions into Italy from his provinces, and so when Caesar does that, this is the pretext for the Roman government to say Julius Caesar is an enemy of the state. He is bent on attacking Rome and placing himself in charge, which is true. And so at this point, the Senate then commissions Pompey to gather his armies and to stop Caesar. Pompey fails, and Caesar comes to Rome and declares himself dictator. The revolt of Spartacus. The key thing about Spartacus is that so this is a massive revolt of gladiators and slaves. These are gladiators that have training in fighting and know how to defend themselves in an uprising. But most of all, this is the largest slave revolt that the Romans had yet experienced. There had been slave revolts before, and they had been put down. But the Romans are a slaveholding society. Their economy is absolutely dependent upon slaves, and so it is absolutely vital that any hint of a slave revolt be crushed immediately, so that it doesn't take hold, so that it doesn't inspire others. What happens instead with Spartacus? The first key point here is, okay, so this is massive, so the size is part of it. The second is that the attempts to crush it fail initially. Rome sends its consuls against Spartacus and his masses, and they are defeated. And this is a massive catastrophe. And so the Roman state commissions Crassus to take care of this by any means necessary. And Crassus destroys the rebellion and crucifies a good number of its rebels. The story is that he erects crosses all the way on the road from where the defeat is in southern Italy, all the way up the road to Rome, so that every certain number of miles you would see another crucified slave rebel, and this is an effort to reimpose the fear in the slaves. But the fact is that this uprising is so massive that there is an outcome to this, which is that Romans become conscious of trying to prevent slave rebellions by reforming the way in which slaves and gladiators are treated, and this has long-lasting impact. There's legislation, but there's also cultural change. So this is a watershed moment in terms of how the Romans relate to their slaves. Romans are still a massive slaveholding society. The Roman Empire still absolutely depends on a massive number of slaves and ex-slaves, that layer of freedmen who act as overseers and clerks and skilled laborers. The Roman industry and commerce is still utterly dependent upon this, but the way in which they're treated, there's a gut reaction to this, formal and informal reaction to this, as a result of the massive size and the success of Spartacus's rebellion.
And that's the end of the quiz. Email me with any questions.